I want to play a really interesting moment from Fox and Friends this morning where Jennifer Griffin, a Fox News correspondent, calmly but brutally dismantles Fox News host Lawrence Jones's really dishonest talking points about aid to Ukraine and about the now dead border bill. And before playing the clip, quickly to give you the context on this, we got news yesterday that Alexei Navalny has died in prison, but very obviously at the hands of Putin, given that Navalny was the opposition leader against Putin and has spent years fighting against Russian corruption and Putin's regime. Obviously super heartbreaking that this happened. We'll talk more about that after the clip. But as they're reporting on this, the conversation of aid to Ukraine came up, given that this is a part of the conversation of Putin's brutality and it relates in that sense. And Lawrence Jones tries to say, hey, Republicans are not against aid to Ukraine. They just want to secure the border first. And Jennifer Griffin correctly points out, but they're the ones blocking action on the border. It's crazy. And you'll notice that initially Lawrence Jones has a lot to say, and then Griffin lays down the facts and Jones goes silent. Then they just move on from Griffin. Here it is.
She is making a case to a domestic audience here. The Biden administration and many members, including Republicans on Capitol Hill, have been making the case for why aid to Ukraine, military aid, weapons to Ukraine are so important in terms of sending a message to Vladimir Putin that he cannot erase land borders, he cannot erase countries, he cannot gobble up a country like Ukraine, he cannot change the rules-based order or the map of Europe.
But Jennifer, respectfully, she's phrasing it as a binary choice. And that's not what many of the members of Congress are saying. They're saying, yes, we will talk about Ukraine. Yes, we'll talk about Israel. But can we put on the table securing the border first?
Lawrence, there was a Senate bill to secure the border that the House wouldn't take up. So that is a false comparison in terms of the choices being made. No, it's not false, because
there are people that have been very critical of the bill and say that it would not secure the border.
Negotiated by Senator Langford of Oklahoma, and the House would not take it up. Now they're trying to revisit, and Brian Fitzpatrick, member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, he has put forward a way to bring the border back into it. It's very strong language from what I saw this morning. But we can't say that nobody wants to talk about the border in this Ukraine legislation. That's what the Senate sent to the House.
Gotcha.
And that's exactly it. Credit to Jennifer Griffin for insisting on correcting the record on this. Really think about how insane this situation is. Republicans block a border bill they demanded because Trump tells them to, because he wants to run the board in the election. Republicans then say they can't act on aid to Ukraine until they get a border bill. It's bonkers. Now, of course, the response, I guess, would be, as you heard a little bit there from Lawrence Jones, oh, well, that's because they just didn't like what was in the border bill. Lies. Border Patrol endorsed the bipartisan Senate border bill. They were pleading with Republicans to stop obstructing it and pass it because it was a dream bill for them, the most aggressive legislative action on the border in our lifetime. But Republicans in the House, clearly, as they're showing with their actions, they don't care about solutions. They really care about fear-mongering, about problems. By the way, here's the outcome of this bill not being passed.
Boris?
The bipartisan Senate border bill that Republicans spiked last week would have provided ICE with billions in much-needed funding. Without that money incoming, the agency has now drafted contingency plans in the face of a dire budget deficit to the tune of some $700 million. CNN has learned that the plan would require cuts to detention capacity and therefore imply the release of thousands of migrants currently in their custody.
And who are they going to undeniably blame for that? Joe Biden. Even though Border Patrol is pretty clearly pointing the finger on this. It's on Republicans here. We have to make sure people know that, by the way, because Republicans are going to do what they can to say otherwise. And then now, because there's this crazy MAGA part of the party who is obsessed with opposing aid to Ukraine because they think Ukraine getting demolished is the path to peace somehow, ridiculous. The Republican Party in the House has to have some excuse for opposing aid to Ukraine. So Mike Johnson's coming out and saying, again, the border has to come first, even though he was the one who refused to bring up the border bill that has all of the wish list items he could possibly wish for. And apparently he's aware that if he were to allow aid to Ukraine through, MAGA would try to oust him like they did to Kevin McCarthy. So once again, we're seeing a speaker act out of fear of MAGA. And it's become something I say daily, but I need to say it again. This is not a party that's at all serious about governing, obviously. And by the way, that shows up in the data as well. They're the least effective house in nearly 100 years. Now back to the subject of Alexei Navalny. Here's Kamala Harris responding to the news right after it broke.
Before I begin today, we've all just received reports that Alexei Navalny has died in Russia. This is, of course, terrible news, which we are working to confirm. My prayers are with his family, including his wife, Yulia, who is with us today. And if confirmed, this would be a further sign of Putin's brutality. Whatever story they tell, let us be clear, Russia is responsible. And we will have more to say on this later.
And that's exactly correct. A thought I was having while watching that clip was, really think about this with me. It's really easy, I think, to just get used to the fact that American politics is the way that it is right now, that Trump has a shot at winning again somehow, and so much of the country is just so wildly misled. But it is genuinely so nuts, if you give it any thought, that there's even a competitive nature to this next election that's probably going to be close. On one side, you have a guy that, even separate from his attempts to block the peaceful transfer of power in 2020 and 2021, and him being a civilly liable rapist, and all of his authoritarian promises for a second term, aside from all of that, he's out saying that if NATO members aren't paying enough, in his mind, he would encourage Russia to attack them. And he's saying this within the context of Russia showing what they're willing to do to gain more territory and power, slaughtering thousands of people just in service of Putin's lust for power. And that's what Trump's analysis is right now on NATO. Whereas on the other side, you have Biden, who united Western allies to respond effectively and urgently right as Ukraine was invaded, who understands the importance of international allies, who understands why Putin should be stopped in his tracks, and of course, a VP who does the same. But we have to hold our breath to see which side America is going to pick. It's not just obviously going to be a landslide. I hope it will be, but it's definitely not going to be, certainly. And that's crazy. Get your together, my fellow Americans. My goodness. Here's more from these remarks from Kamala Harris, now on the subject of aid to Ukraine.
Imagine if America turned our back on Ukraine and abandoned our NATO allies and abandoned our treaty commitments. Imagine if we went easy on Putin, let alone encouraged him. History offers a clue. If we stand by while an aggressor invades its neighbor with impunity, they will keep going. And in the case of Putin, that means all of Europe would be threatened.
Then here's Jennifer Griffin, again fact-checking the idea that we're just giving a blank check to Ukraine and have no idea where the resources are going.
A study by AEI shows that 90% of the $68 billion the U.S. has already sent to Ukraine supports weapons factories here in the U.S. Abrams tanks and Stryker vehicles are made in Lima, Ohio. They identified 117 production lines, weapons production lines, in 31 U.S. states that are producing weapons for Ukraine, which means U.S. jobs, of course. Javelin anti-tank missiles are built in Troy, Alabama, and Tucson, Arizona. Howitzers are built in Minneapolis. The Switchblade drones used in Ukraine are made in Forest, Mississippi, and York, Pennsylvania. I could go on and on.
Yeah, this is going towards weapons, towards equipment they urgently need and will immediately be used. Not to all the conspiratorial sources that people like Marjorie Greene say it's going to. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel.